My name is Sara Cochran. I am Chief Curator here, and it is my enormous good fortune to welcome you. Thank you for coming out on this autumn, winter, summer, who knows what season it is. And I think that that is going to be an important point given the importance of climate change in your book. So we could not have a better day for it. Steve, thank you for being here. I think everybody knows Steve, but nevertheless, I want to point out that Steve is an extraordinary multimedia artist who has been involved with this intersection of art and science for a couple of decades now. Perhaps I would like to say you are our local Sagaponic alchemist, somehow involving that kind of intersection. So thank you for that. Thank you for honoring us with your art and also for the book, of which we have one copy here in the back. This is going to be a conversation between Steve and I, and then we will open it up for questions. And then there will be a reception afterwards where we can all talk together and also talk to Steve. So Steve, thank you so much for being here today. And let's get on with the show.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank a few people. Sherry, for one, who's over there, who's our director, and Sara and Talina and Sam and Kristen, if they're here. And I saw Sebastian. Is Sebastian White here by any chance? He may come. I saw he reserved. He's the one of the physicists from CERN that sort of set up this whole story to get involved with the theory group. And my brother's here tonight as well. And woohoo! He traveled to get here, and I did, this morning was talking to Sara. We're not going to have enough time to get into early childhood, so Gar can help you with that later.
So let's start with the beginning. And I do want to have a quick probe at the early childhood. Science nerd or art nerd?
Definitely not a science nerd, and not an art nerd either. You know, art was just, I don't think you're an art nerd, you just start doing it, you know. It's not, I was always something I did as a kid, so. And I had some other special speech and learning disabilities, so, you know, art was kind of the way to go. So, and I never stopped. Here we are.
So 2000, to jump right in, you were at Brookhaven, invited there. And what was it about that experience that just sort of set off the lightning and sparklers?
So that's an interesting story, and see if I can do the short version of it. So Brookhaven had actually had a spill a while ago, right? And there was a carcinogenic plume, and the director, a guy named John Marburger, who ended up being Bush's science advisor, like some people know who he is, the only Democrat in Bush's administration, by the way, but he had been involved with art and technology in Los Angeles, and he was at Stony Brook, and they pulled him over to kind of take over the lab. And as we all know, if you have a bad neighborhood, invite some artists to come in and they'll open up a coffee shop and rehabilitate it. So they had this idea to invite a bunch of artists there to work there. And because I had done other art science related early on with the computers, and I was one of the people that got invited. And we got a tour of the entire lab. And actually, we have someone from the lab here today, Mike Kemmer, who actually did the what do you call it, Mike? What do you do? The alignment of the particle collider. So there's a collider, a 2.5-mile ring at Brookhaven. Mike did all the leveling. Now it's pretty high-tech stuff because I'm going off on another tangent, but it's a very high technical place, and we got to see all the experiments. And I really liked the collider. That was kind of interesting. And what they were doing then, in 2000, they were looking for quark gluon plasma. So that's the state of matter at Big Bang. So they take gold protons or lead protons, and they collide them. And when they have this collision, the quarks and gluons separate from outside of the proton, and they make this plasma state. And I was really fascinated with the technology, the toys. You're seeing this first tool and you're just going crazy. And I'd done a project there about human protein with a guy named Rod McKinnon who while we were working together, he won the Nobel in chemistry. And what Rod had done, he's taken part of the beam, the accelerator, before they really get it up to the speed of light. And they take those beams, it's called X-ray crystallography, and they shoot them through crystallized forms of human protein. And he figured out, this is the start of the electrical story of this book, so it's relevant. He figured out how positively charged ions move across cell membranes. And so that's the story of the electricity in the human body. And then there's the human need electricity in the favela, and then there's that abundance of electricity at CERN, and we can break that down. But it all started really at Brookhaven, and understanding that there's this amazing tool that make you see the world in a different kind of way, and make you understand that Newtonian reality is not where, it's just a small little part of our little corner in the universe, and it has, quantum is what's happening.
And you hit upon the word which is kind of essential both to this current project, but I think also to probably a very large part of your career, which is this idea of energy, the visible, invisible, and the idea of beauty. And those things would seem to really collide in this project.
So energy started out at a museum in Buffalo, New York, and I saw a Pollock painting. I was like astounded. I was like 9 years old. It was very emotional, actually, this painting. And you come upon this thing, you've never seen it before, and you see like all of this crazy swirls of paint energetically flipping through, the universe, and you're going like, and you've never seen anything like this before, and you're going like, what is this? And there's this undeniable urgency and energy in art. And what I saw in that Pollock painting was this incredible urgency to get an idea out there, and also the freedom and liberation and the energetic, he sort of like visualized the energy of a gesture, as de Kooning and other people have done as well. But I think Pollock just did it superbly well without any reference to anything other than the physical aspect of that idea. So that was sort of the start of the races.
And Tyson, obviously, in his foreword to your book, talks about this beautiful way that sort of advanced mathematics and advanced contemporary art sort of meet on this plane, where it is about theory, and it is about how you manifest that theory for audiences who are perhaps not talking at that level.
Well, there's theory and there's language. And the language system is the language of technology. So every art in its time has a visual language. So make a quick art. You have like pre-Giotto, right? You have Byzantine flat layers. Then you get 1-point perspective Giotto. If you've ever been to look at the early Giotto frescoes, not the later ones that are upstairs, but they look incredibly primitive. The people at that time thought they were real, right? They looked real. And then you get 2-point perspective. And so these ideas that technology can cause changes in consciousness. And so I gave a lecture at CERN about the fact that these changes in technology allow you to see the world in a different way. And what happened in Venice, right near, and also in Belgium, is that you get oil on canvas. So that's technology that really opens up the world to expression and abstraction. So there's the idea that each era is tied to the visual language of its time. So that's the technology that I'm exploring. But then there's also the theory. I think you use the word, and I would use the word content. And like what is the aspect of that technology that reveals content that's important to our time? Guess what? We're heating up, and there's a lot of important things. And I think what Neil said, and also Carl Safina said in the first book, was how we're all connected. And so this technology alienates us, and it connects us at the same time. And the connecting allows for new distributions of ways to disseminate ideas and knowledge. So this technology is its theory and its technique.
And I think the physicality of that is perhaps a wonderful way to segue into the works of art that are surrounding us. One of the things that's so well discussed in the book is this idea of energy and especially electricity, something that you have just alluded to in your experience at Brookhaven. But you have layered onto this idea of some of the photos you took in the favelas in Brazil, where you've talked about it's looking at what is obvious but also not seen and understanding how that kind of connects people. So with electricity, we have this tool that makes our lives easier, but also is making obviously more and more demands on the planet. But if we look at the two works that are here, perhaps if you can talk a little bit about that visual interaction of the images from CERN and the images from the favela.
So the initial visual kind of, observation and reaction, you go into the favela, it's a really wild place. We have Dalton here who's from Rio, and we were just talking earlier about, walking in there, and it's a journey to get there. That's a whole nother story, like how you even get in there without getting shot. And but when you get in, you see this incredible vitality. And you see these drawings in space, which are these wires. And the drawings in space really mirror many things. First of all, it's a collective drawing. It's a drawing based on necessity, the need for electricity. It's chaotic because they're taking, it reflects what's going on in the Amazon. The chaos in the Amazon is reflected in the wires. The electrical company never goes in there. There is a picture in the book where one day, the only time I ever saw, every once in a while, every few years, the military goes in, and they're in for about 3 or 4 days. The electrical, there are some meters there. I don't know if anybody pays, but I have a feeling that no one pays for anything, and it's just chaos. But that collective energy and chaos is a visual drawing in space, and it really mirrors the kind of energy and urgency that I see in fine art. So, that's the visual story of what those actual wires look like. And yes, they do carry, electrons, as, the essay that Neil deGrasse Tyson wrote. And it is what connects us. And, the one thing Neil said was like, we're all plugged in, right? Every one of us is plugged into that socket, right? And it's CERN. So the favela represents human behavior. And I think we're all pretty sure it's not going to change, right? We want to slow down this, this march towards, warmer climate, more CO2, and we don't seem to be doing a really great job at it. And then you have at CERN, you have these incredible experiments where they're really trying to understand if through science and through technology and with this abundance of energy, could science actually solve some of these problems? So it's sort of this dialogue between the abundance of energy, the lack of energy. The lack of energy shows the human condition and how we are and how we've always been. And then at CERN, you've got this sort of advanced thinking about another reality, which is actually the reality, which is quantum reality, which is subatomic, which is quarks and gluons, which is throughout the cosmos and the universe. And those guys and women are working on the ways to really figure out, they're doing research, but they're also doing, there's practical research that comes from it. And are we going to have some shield that's going to go over the Earth, that's going to slow down? I mean, I don't know what they're going to figure out. Are we going to have carbon sinks? Are we going to figure out how to have enough electricity to actually get the carbon and put it in the ground? I mean, these are the kinds of questions that, I hope people think about. And then the book is like a movie. I used to be in the film business, and the book is like a storyboard, like a comic book. You flip through it. It's not the, I love these books, and I grew up on these books, but it's not 10 essays and then, the art in sequence. And I'd love to have a book like that, by the way, but that hasn't happened yet. But this book is really about trying to stimulate your imagination, surprise your eyes, make you ask questions, and be part of the conversation. And one more thing I'm going to say is I have a rule, which is nobody can write more than 3 pages, and because no one's going to read more than 3 pages. And so that's it. We have a physicist from CERN who wrote, I think Arthur Miller wrote 3 pages. I think I wrote 2, and Neil wrote a page and a half. And just why Sebastian is here. So we do have a physicist from CERN who sort of opened the doors here. So raise your hand, Sebastian, if you got a question about physics. Early childhood, my brother, physics, Sebastian White.
So let's talk about what it was like to get to CERN, and then also what it is like to actually be at CERN.
Well, to get to CERN is really a journey, and they have an arts program. I actually tried to apply for the arts program. I didn't do it. I was trying to find, grant money to go to Brazil. It was like, at some point, you just got to go. And I'd already worked at Brookhaven, so that gave me a little bit of cred. And then I met Sebastian, and he really kind of set me up with the theory group there. So you go there, the theory group, and I could be corrected in Q&A if I'm doing anything wrong here, Sebastian. But the theory group, the joke about the theory group is they make the most outrageous chalkboards in the world in the hope that they might be true and you win the Nobel Prize. So you could just think about anything and write anything crazy. And this is actually one of the most famous chalkboards. I don't know if it's still up there, but when I was there, it was widely photographed. The original picture is in the book, so you can see it. And these equations in these chalkboards are, again, they have that same urgency and energy, especially when you watch them doing it. You watch someone writing out an equation, it really feels like the kind of urgency that you have when, an artist is making a work of art.
The scale of CERN has to be overwhelming. I mean, It's, 30 stories underground, and the collider itself is 8 stories high?
Yeah, it's 17.5-mile ring. Each detector is about 8 stories high. There is also a photograph in the book of the 2 circles, the detectors. I think the Southampton Press had a photo also while we're waiting for the book. And there's a guy in the background sitting against a railing. You can see how small he is. So the scale underground is enormous. And what they're doing is they're running these protons through a tube. There's magnets on the end of each tube. That magnet suspends the beam. It's a different charge in the beam, suspends it in space. So it's a frictionless environment, which they super cool with liquid hydrogen and liquid helium, and run those things close to the speed of light. And when they do that, so they close up so the thing that you're seeing in the book is these 2 big circles. They eventually put them together, and they have to time 2 beams going in the opposite direction, moving at the speed of light, so they will collide. And then they measure the collisions as they're going every direction, right? They're going every direction at the speed of light, and then they're tracking them and taking a charge. So each time you have a collision, you have a charge, electrical charge. That charge is the equivalent to the mass of the particle that you're trying to find. In this case, they're looking at the Higgs boson. But you're getting there, and it's like the 4th of July every day in your brain, because you just can't. If I'm putting you to sleep now talking about this, you just can't imagine the excitement of being there, and also, as a result of this sort of entree, the theory group was actually the best group to be with, because I had lunch with these guys, lunch and dinner every day. And you could sit there and ask them questions, some of which, one of those conversations is also in the book.
So how did you find, this is fundamentally about language. How did you find a way in? I know that you did a lot of research before you went, but you have talked to me in previous conversations about how what was going on was just so far beyond. What was your way into those conversations?
Well, the way in was kind of through a fairy tale that there's a conversation in the book just to get them started. I'd done a lot. I still do a lot of reading all the time about physics. I still don't understand it. And Richard Feynman, Nobel Prize winner, has a famous quote, "Nobody understands particle physics." So it's quantum mechanics is very, because it's based on probability. It's something where if you shine a light on it, you put energy on it, so you change the result of the experiment. So it's just this really queer, weird, queer, crazy world and you're trying to make sense of it. And so one of the conversations I had at CERN was, I go like, okay, so we know that we're trying to figure out something called the standard model, which has got all the, particles, sorted out, gluons, muons, quarks, leptons, photons, neutrinos, whatever, and they're trying to figure out what are all the basic elementary particles of the universe, and not even just knowing what they are is, and then they have spin and up and down. It's incredible. And then there's, quantum entanglement, which is something really interesting, where particles that are can be miles apart from each other actually are communicating. So I think that there's this entanglement now where we got to like start this whole communication thing. I hate to go to Woodstock moment, but this science thing and what goes on at CERN is this opportunity to really understand, there's the physical entanglement of the wires, there's the entanglement of what's going on in culture right now on every level, and then there's the flat out necessity to look for solutions. So all of that stuff is going on simultaneously. And most of CERN is like basic research, but I think the idea as CERN and the favela, the human condition as a vehicle, as a container for this conversation where painting and photography and sculpture can reside. It's just this incredible opportunity to have the language of the time, the understanding of the human condition, the need for change, all in this sort of one vehicle, which for me is a painting.
So let me ask a kind of provocative question, because it's okay, I'm not going to write anything down, it's just a tick. Thank you. So let me ask a rather provocative question. I mean, we are dealing with I'm going to put all of this down so I don't drop anything more. We're dealing with extremely complex ideas, both in science, in your art, in the world, real world problems. And we are also dealing with this really interesting and essential question of the Higgs boson particle, which is more commonly known as the God particle. Is art one of the best ways of kind of representing that?
Well, I don't think you can really represent it. All you can do is come up with sort of visual metaphors that might stimulate your thinking. And if you can ask yourself, if the viewer's going, what the hell is going on here? Then you're in the right place.
And
so,
did you feel that those were the kind of questions you were having at CERN?
For me, it's the questions are actually larger questions, because one of the lunches in the cafeteria, there's like a private dining room, and I'm going like, okay, so here we are. We know that this standard model is like 5% of the visible universe. And it was like a Marx Brothers movie. I think John Ellis was there. I can't remember who else was there, Sebastian, but I was saying, okay, so what's the rest of it? And they go, kind of in unison, dark matter, dark energy. And I go, okay, what's that? In unison, they go, and they smile, and they go like, we don't know. At that point, they had not measured gravitational waves. So that was, I think, 2010. I can't remember. I think that was 2010. Gravitational waves was like a few years ago. They, realized that, a black hole can emit a gravitational force, and that can be detected by a detector. So I think the thing I'm trying to say is that we're looking at, right now, this experience is 5% of reality, if you want to think about it that way. And the rest of it is 95% of stuff we don't know. That's based on, but the real reality is real. I mean, art is always about what's the nature of reality, and that's the question that art always asks. And that's the Warhol Brillo box question. Which is real, the Warhol Brillo box or the Brillo box that's in the grocery store? And if they're both different, what's their difference? And that difference is a philosophical question on the nature of reality. So I think that art always asks you that. I mean, Giotto asks you that as much as Duchamp.
And yet, there's a wonderful quote from Malraux where he says something like, "Beyond research, there's only inspiration," which brings in these really interesting questions of, what is the nature of human knowledge? And I think in some of these paintings, you're again dealing with that, because you're dealing with this idea of connection, representation, and then how to get beyond that, how to sort of communicate something to the audience. And I find all of that particularly interesting in this kind of conversation.
Is that a question?
It was a statement question. Okay, so
I'll say something about what you just said, which is, again, the story, there's inspiration, great, but then there's necessity. And I think the Pollock is about, if you know Pollock's story, it's like at some point the necessity transformed into something that really expressed that moment of need. This is my interpretation at any rate. Other people may see Pollock differently. But I think when you see the way he was looking at subconscious and his psychological drawings and stuff, at some point the theory didn't matter. Like, he just had to friggin' do it, right? And I think the favelas, like, they just got to do it. And actually in CERN, it's the same thing. These guys, these people, they just have, it's a need. And, every once in a while inspiration can come in, but I think the need for knowledge, the need to make connections. And I think art is the one thing, in this crazy world. I mean, I've done a lot of different things, a software company, all sorts of different stuff. But the only thing that really, really matters is figuring out how to connect to people, how to connect to each other. That's why I like this place, because it's about forming a community, and it's like, this is the place where discussion can happen, and art is just one of those containers that allows that. And not many people could actually get the art thing all the time, because you got to go to a place, and the book solves that problem. The book is an attempt to give you that same experience that you would get looking at a painting, asking the same questions. Why would you do this? What is this about? And, I mean, it's that Gauguin painting, like, who are we, where are we going? Yeah.
And there is a really interesting discussion in the book about beauty and what beauty means, both in beautiful, the word beautiful means both to some of the scientists you worked with and within art. Is that something you want to talk about, or do you want me to?
I do want to talk about that.
Because that is a fascinating discussion.
So the second essay is by a physicist, a guy named Arthur Miller. He wrote a book called Einstein Picasso, and he's one of the few physicists that I've met that knows anything about art or has studied it a lot. Again, I'll get some pushback, maybe, from other physicists that are in the room. But what was interesting about, he came and spoke at SVA, School of Visual Arts, where I teach in New York, and we were talking about aesthetics, and one of the artists was thinking that aesthetics was traditionally in the realm of fine art, and there was a big discussion about the aesthetics of mathematics and science. So this is in the book. There's Richard Feynman had done an equation, and they had tried to validate the equation. And what happens in science is it's not like the rest. Neil has a new book out about this. It's not opinion. It's like the Higgs boson is 99.9%. That they've actually found it. It's not, we think we found it. The standards are so impeccably, unbelievably high. So aesthetics. So Feynman does this equation. People try to figure out whether it's valid, whether it works. And the first people that looked at it couldn't validate the results of the equation. And it was considered a failure. And he was, kind of all worked up about it. He had a big ego. And he's really smart. And they finally, got other people to look at the equation and validate it, and it ended up being a true equation. And he said, of course it's true, because it's beautiful. It was a beautiful equation. So there's, this whole idea of aesthetics that is a mental, it's not only the visual thing that we see in our eyes, it's an aesthetic space. And I think what I learned at CERN was that aesthetic space can be conceptual, intellectual. In fine art, it could be physical. And I think the beauty of art is that most of us can relate to the physicality of paint, the texture, that a show about fabric here, weaving, threading the needle, I think it was called, and it was like so fantastically textural, and you could touch, and we all have things that are made of fabric, so it was very immediate and physical, and I think art can do that, because art, you can see it with your eyes, but mathematics is like, forget about it.
But it was really interesting because that discussion talked about the idea of symmetry. And again, the idea that, sorry, I'm just trying to get all my thoughts straight. This idea of symmetry was that certain elements could be replaced and the overall equation would remain the same. And so there were these really interesting ideas of beauty just being really specific, as you say, aesthetics within another realm, which, for us in the contemporary art world, thinking of something as perhaps not as structured as science, I'm interested in how you related to that as an artist.
Well, the way in, if I understand the question, the way in is through what we do.
Press the bottom.
Okay. There we go. The way in is through, like I'm a child. I see Twombly and Basquiat, right? And, those artists understood, the gesture, graffiti, and so when you go look at those chalkboards, they look like a Cy Twombly painting, except that they mean something. Not the Cy Twombly doesn't mean anything, but there's a specific content that's directly related to the gestures that are on the board, and that really intrigued me because now you have these gestures and you say, well, what is this about? And what it's about is there's quantum reality. And so, there's a very rich universe of ideas that we can tap, and that visual access is really kind of immature from my point of view, and I understand like the concepts that these guys are talking about, but art does give you that doorway to get in there and then start asking more questions. I guess I'm just trying to do the same thing.
So, yes, I am. So one of the things I'm interested in, again, just paralleling this discussion with the actual artworks which are here in the room, is this idea of creating space. Because obviously one of the things of mathematics is to understand it, to understand a place of understanding. One of the things about your painting is to allow the viewer in to see some of these analogies. And so I'm very interested in the way you have this kind of gesturality or gestural work behind the images of the wires that, of course, kind of remind us of abstract expressionism and Jackson Pollock, someone you've referenced as important. And then to the other side, we have, again, that background with the equation and again with the wires. It's just so interesting to see how this fused together in your mind and how long this kind of drove this part of your production. Again, a statement question.
Yeah, I'm trying to figure this one out.
So,
if you're talking about space, the space in art, and we started out talking about Byzantine art that had very little space. I think the Pollock space and the Twombly space, for example, that really rich, and Titian, for that matter, especially late Titian, this idea that you can go, I love that you can go back in deep space and move around and go around a corner. You see something, you can imagine that your eye could go around, and then you got to make up, for me, what's around that corner, what would that look like? So I've always been into this, very complex spatial work. I try to make simple work, but it just, I have a hard, I do it with my x-rays, actually. Some of the Amazon stuff is a little simpler. Because I'm dealing with something that actually exists, where in CERN and with mathematics and with quantum, you're trying to intimate that there's this other space. So I want the physical space of the painting, and then maybe you'll look at the chalkboards, and then your head will go to the mental space. And I think that's something you see in the work of like Jasper John sometimes, the painting False Start. Mm-hmm. If you don't know this painting, I think it just sold for a lot of money, but it's like abstract expressionist gestures. There'll be the paint color, a red paint, blotch, with the word yellow on it, but the word yellow will be painted blue. And I think what he's talking about is the arbitrary nature of language. And then we start to think about, well, language is this really interesting place to start. So you have the physical, you look at it and go like, well, wait, that's a red spot with a yellow word and it's painted blue. That makes no sense. And it just gets you into that whole Magritte, ceci n'est pas une pipe, this is not a pipe, and getting your head into that exciting mental space that I think art can do.
And I think what ties together your work in sort of the X-ray with this work is this search for making the intangible tangible.
Yeah, it's a head trip. I want you to have a visual trip, and I want you to have a mental ride, if you can go there. But I think the starting place, it has to be something you want to look at. That's the thing about art. You look at it. And it's not a requirement to think about it. However, I get excited about art I can think about and look at it at the same time. So those are kinds of my inspirations.
So I do want to open this up for questions. But before we do that, I have one last question, which is technology and science have been part of your work for a very, very long time. And they have influenced both how you make art, how you have approached the marketing of certain aspects of the visual of your work in some of your apparel and some of your skateboards and surfboards. What excites you about what you are going to do next with sort of art, technology, and science?
I'm actually thinking about a cheaper way to do all of this. Because, technology is just, it's really expensive. And actually, I'm thinking, I'm going like, can I do this same thing spending less money? So that's one thing I'm thinking about. But I think the visual ride is the same. It's like you want to take the viewer on a trip. And if I don't go on it myself while I'm making the work, for me, that's what I'm doing. When I make one of these, I actually tape out some of these lines and stuff, and then I can do it for so long, and then I just go crazy. I just go like, I can't do this anymore. And so, I just don't have the patience. And then you work yourself up into a frenzy, right? And then and I have my assistant photograph everything, film it in slow motion, but then I just like let it rip, and go like, okay, I'm done. And then you go back and you try to nurse it and keep it alive. And I'll paint back in. I actually will go with oil paint, just to create the illusion. If I need the illusion, I need greater illusion. I'll go ahead and manufacture that illusion, even if it isn't there. So it's this visual journey to create a ride, but I'm not sure I answered the question.
You're obviously a great lover of books, and we're very upset tonight that we don't have the books with us. We know they're somewhere in the middle of the country.
I would like to say something about that. So the books are supposed to be here in July, and they were supposed to be here a while ago, and they may be here in a week. That's what I've been told. But what I've done is, for everyone that's at this event, there's a piece of paper on the back table, and if you buy a book or if you give a book to anybody, they can make an appointment to come to my studio and I'll sign the book. So it'll be like whoever comes to my studio with that piece of paper, they'll get a little studio visit and I'll sign the book. So I hope that is an incentive to buy a book.
We think this is an excellent Christmas present. We're just saying experiential, and you get a book. So we are very excited about that. So there is one copy for you to look at. I think if you get a chance, ask Steve personally about this idea of the book as a filmic experience. It's a really interesting idea that we didn't touch on. But now I would like for myself to be quiet and to ask you guys for your questions. If you can just wait until I hand over.
I'm fascinated by the title of the book. I would love you to say a little bit more about that. I
think the second. So this is a 3 two-part series, right? This is a trilogy. This is the last book of the trilogy. The first one was radiographic. That was X-ray in the Amazon. That was a 10-year project. Then Surfskate was about getting that message into the world. And the surf part of it was that in Brazil, especially in the favela, well, everyone's got a surfboard, and it's like this trophy, you know. And so my first surfboard was to X-ray, Cayman, and put it on a surfboard as sort of this like pseudo-environmental trophy. It's made of plastic, but we didn't kill the alligators, so, and we're not stuffing the alligators. So the water, the surf is part of a water conversation that's a global conversation. And then putting that together with the cosmos is what I've been trying to intimate, is that like there's us and then there's out there. There's our reality, and then there's the reality that's just so unbelievably complex and fascinating and an exciting place to want to go, explore. And I think I'm the worst surfer that's in this room, and I crushed my spine, and I can't surf anymore, but I do make a lot of surfboards. And I think it's a vehicle for communication. So you have this vehicle for communication that can sort of take you out into Never Never Land.
Can I ask a question?
Uh-oh, director question. I'm scared.
I'm curious, actually. I mean, you talk quite a bit about the way science has impacted your process of painting, not necessarily not only the way you think about it, but also what you're making and how you make it. My question is, has the process of painting impacted the way you process and think about science?
Yeah, maybe it's this futile attempt to put them together in one place, because I think it's, this like us, them, especially with science, in our culture. It's like nobody understands it. So I think the paint, the physical material of paint is that tactile, physical experience that can maybe suck you in and then connect you to those larger ideas. So, yeah, painting is the place. I mean, it's all about painting. We've talked a lot about science, but I'm an artist and I'm a painter and a photographer and a sculptor, and it's really about using those mediums to communicate and the pleasure of those mediums. So it all starts with painting.
Thank you. Other questions? Yeah. Brian and Eric.
Is the stuff coming out of the Webb telescope impacting your artistic point of view?
Yeah, as the question was Webb telescope. Well, I did. I don't know if you come to my studio, you'll see this Andromeda surfboard that I did, and I just did this X-ray of a lobster on top of the Andromeda galaxy as a surfboard. It's really cool. It's not in the book, but the Andromeda surfboard is the actual last page in that book, and that's not the new telescope. So yeah, I really would love to play with that stuff. I mean, you have to, right? It's the images are so unbelievably compelling, and to work with them. But yeah, I would love to do that. I'm conceptualizing, but I haven't done it yet.
One of the things we're speculating looking through the images is that it's possible that there are infinite universes.
Wait, say that again. I didn't.
We're talking about the idea that there are infinite universes.
Yeah, well, that's a whole, there's a really, I'm going to go off on a tangent. There's a really interesting point of view right now that we are in the perfect place and time to understand this idea of infinite universes, because if the universe is expanding and we went all the way to the limits of that expansion, and we are where we are now, we'd be in complete darkness. And we'd have no idea in our darkness what the history of the universe is. So this idea of multi-universe, obviously this is way over my pay scale, but I mean, what it does is it just gets your mind going, right? Like what? The universe is expanding. It would expand to total darkness, or we're all gonna get sucked into the biggest black hole ever. And that will be total darkness. These ideas of what the cosmos is yeah. It's like crazy stuff. It's really fun to think about. I don't know if I answered the question.
Thank you.
Could you talk a little bit more about your process of actually creating these canvases, like photography, painting, intention, you know?
So, yeah, I can. Each of the, all of my stuff is a performance piece, right? So the painting is the result of the performance. And part of that performance is going to the Amazon or figuring out how to get into the favela. You can't just, as Dalton can tell you, you can't just like walk in there, right? It's just not that kind of place. So, yeah. And I had actually given a bunch of kids in the school cameras, kids in Vigigao actually, at Parkology. I was giving them cameras and see if I could get them to go take the photos that I wanted. I gave them the cameras. They went in. They're kids. They took whatever they wanted. They didn't care what I did. So I got all these photos back that were completely not useful. So it's still relevant to this painting. So now the performance piece is, okay, how the hell do I get in there, right? And so you pay off a drug dealer. And it's sort of not quite that obvious. You make a donation to the crèche, to the nursery school. And they take you to the nursery school, and they go, oh, you've given this money to the nursery school, and these are the children. No photos, right? And then they give you a bodyguard, and the bodyguard tells you when you can take photos, when you can't take photos. And that's a whole nother story. But and then you get a camera that has the fastest lens speed possible, right? Shutter speed, because you're on the fly. You got to shoot this stuff really fast, and you can't just say, oh, I want to set up the shot. You're walking, you got to shoot, you got to get it really fast. So this would be an example of on that walk through the favela of the base image, which I then do actually in series. By the time I blow it up, I kind of know pretty much what the moves are in the painting, what I need to do, how it needs to be different than the previous painting, how much I'm going to cover the photograph, how much paint in relationship to traditional photographic image. And then I try to construct a drawing. And the drawing is implicit in I want to make a drawing, but the drawing's implicit in what I have there, and then I pull out and decide what part of the drawing is going to be the drawing that I make. And that can be through masking tape, and then I'll get frustrated, I'll throw the paint everywhere, I'll pull it up, it's messy, it isn't what I wanted, and then I actually go in with a brush, which I haven't done in 30 years. And with this group of work, I actually go in and create illusion and shadow and lines, because there might be some part of the drawing that I want to enhance. I want you to get into the space in a certain kind of way, and I will physically, just to give you an example, there was paint all over this thing, right? This one circle, but I really wanted this circle to be clean. So I would go in there with a little tiny brush and just clean it up, just so I could have that sort of graphic component enhanced as a kind of a visual resting place for your eye. So, does that answer the question?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, we had a question over here.
Yeah.
The idea of the larger themes in your work, where you've done this is a lyrical picture. Where do you find that you get inspiration for the overall theme and the larger picture, not for individual themes?
What's the conceptual basis of the project? Is that the question? I guess the conceptual basis of the problem is, how do we deal with the world that we live in? What are the questions we should be asking about this world? What is our level of responsibility? What can we do? What can't we do? And then how do I connect with others? And also, how do I have my own personal, investigation that I get to do on my own without anybody else looking at me and without being responsible for the results. So, it's all of those, different ways that you can approach this total larger project. But does that do it? Okay.
I have a question if no one else does.
Oh, there's.
All right, Sebastian, go for it.
Also
Yeah, we gotta give you a mic so everyone can hear this because this is good. Sebastian knows what he's talking
Why
about.
are you into wires? Simple question.
Oh, okay. That's really easy to answer it. I think I kind of answered it, but you said the first part, like some of the wires at CERN, you know, the way they're in the book, but they're all ordered, you know, like you go around and they're all parallel and they look like a Lichtenstein brushstroke. You know, so that's kind of really cool about the stuff at CERN because it's very organized. The wire is also carries energy, and its expression of energy, and in the case of the favela, it's urgency. And the wire is a line, and a line in fine art is also the starting point, right? It's a drawing. It's the space between 2 points, and it's the thing that everything in art really revolves around is the line, I would say.
Thank you. Eric?
I have three things that came up in the talk that I'm puzzling out. Maybe it'll take the form of the way Sara asked a question. No. No, the first is about elegant solutions. I would say that the rectangle is an elegant solution within the language of you know, how one sees the world, how one is able to capture in a completely abstracted way something that seems like, oh yeah, this is how we see the world. We see it in this particular shape. It's either a landscape sort of format or a figurative vertical format, et cetera, et cetera. And all of the problems that painters have historically dealt with in relationship to this elegant solution has to do with how one moves into, around, through, back upon, et cetera, this condition, which is we have to frame the world in order to make sense of it. And that led me to think about the CERN is set up, obviously, in a construct that is, you know, enormous, right? But it has to do with a concept that, in order to understand the world, the universe world, it has to be diagrammed through an explosion, and that seems like, it's actually a question for the physicist here, is there other models that can capture a construct of the universe that doesn't have to do with the collision as a founding part of it? Like I was wondering, well, here's this circle, these things zooming around. If things all went in the same direction but at different speeds, would that name another aspect of physical reality?
So I wouldn't use geometry necessarily, and I would look at it a different way, because at Big Bang, everything's going at the speed of light in every direction possible, and whatever, 380 million years later, the first thing that happens is quarks and gluons embrace. So that's not mathematics, that's the strong force. And there's four forces in the universe. There's the strong force, which is gluons, and where particles embrace, and you have the basic, eventually, periodic table. You have electromagnetism, you have gravity, and then you have radiation, which is the degradation of the beta particle. And the boson, the Higgs boson, was, again, I'm going to have Sebastian correct me, but there was this idea of electromagnetism, and how do you connect so this has nothing to do with geometry, that's why I'm talking about this. How do you connect electromagnetism with radiation, right? And so is there a defining particle that would put these different particles all together? So you know, the boson was this idea, was this mechanism that gave all other particles mass. So it's another place it's a place of possibility and interaction, right? And the periodic table is like all of these, the basic elements start to like attract each other, collide, create mass. And the big collision that you're talking about, CERN, they're colliding particles, but like a black hole emits massive amounts of radiation, right? And a star collapses on itself, and then, it becomes so dense. Another kind of system of relationships starts to interact. And so there's these other levels that all of this can deal with, and I wouldn't necessarily. I'm an artist, so like you, I'm really involved with the rectangle, and as a photography is about the rectangle, right? So it's a great question, but I think it's just it's one limited area that we work in.
Well, you're describing it as though they're not trying to actually understand it through a construct, and the construct is whatever that structure is, in the same way that you try to solve whatever emotional or gestural or visual problems, et cetera, through this thing called a rectangle, et cetera. It controls the outcome. And, there are certainly in the history of art, when they step outside of the rectangle, they come up with a different kind of art.
Yeah, dance.
Well,
music.
Yeah. I have one last question that can be answered simply. Why is CERN in Switzerland as opposed to some other mountain range, or is there something specific about the magnetic pull of the planet that said that this is the perfect spot for?
Well, there was a collider already there,
a
right,
financial
Sebastian?
thing?
There was an experiment. Here, go ahead. You want to answer?
Can I pass that to you?
CERN was an idea from a number of people, some of whom were Americans. One was I. Rabi, a very famous American physicist, who petitioned after World War II that it would be fantastic to have an organization where people could, first of all, pool their resources, and second of all, have something which is just done by international treaty, and everyone gets to play a role, and everybody pays according to their gross national product. And as with many other things, there was then a search committee for a site, and there were a lot of sites that were looked at. And I think part of the argument was, of course, that I think due to Gustave Ador, after World War I suppose it was, CERN had become an international center where you had these organizations like the United Nations that were centered there. But there was a search committee. All over, I think southern France was another candidate. So it has nothing to do with the terrain. In fact, now it's tough because we want to build another thing, and it's geographically incredibly unfavorable. You have to go underneath Lake Geneva and then through the mountains. It's not, could have been a better spot, like middle of China. But anyway.
Thank you so much.
Perhaps one more question? Well,
Right here?
Yes.
One more question?
Yes.
Would you like to ask?
Oh, well, these paintings are oil or acrylic or?
Everything.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I see these lines, wires, like veins, and the kind of brings more of a body, like relating it to the human body, which this work is very much in the head. All of this stuff is very heady.
I love what you're saying. I mean, making it's a body experience,
Yeah.
right? I mean, and
Yeah.
blood goes through veins. It's a great idea. Electricity pulses through wires, and it's an energetic gesture that creates a work of art. So that's the body part. But great observation. Thank you.
Yeah, maybe like the body's a universe that, possibly.
Everybody's earned a drink at this point, right? Okay.
thank you,
Thank you
Steve.
so much. Thank you.